Yeah, it's a very friendly voice. So we are recording tonight, and we will be sharing this on our social media channels. So if you don't want to be recorded, please do make sure that you have your camera off and your microphone off. But other than that, you are welcome to have your camera on. We do like to see people's faces at Young Greens events, but there is no pressure to do so if you don't wish to. We do also have the option for live transcription as well. So if you feel that that would be useful to you, please do turn that on. If you are using Zoom, we're all using Zoom, there should be a little CC button down the bottom of your screen that you can press, and that will turn captions on for you. In terms of tech stuff, if you have any problems, please do message myself, Kelsey, or Ash. Ash is the Young Greens treasurer and is helping us out with tech things tonight. Via the chat, and you can message us there. The final thing for me to mention, not the final thing, second to last thing for me to mention, is that as this is a Young Green space, we are enforcing the Young Green Safe Spaces policy, which I'm hoping Kelsey is going to post in the chat for me.
They are now.
Thank you. So we will have sent this out to you in the emails beforehand, but please do make sure that you've had a quick read of that. It's basically making sure that we keep these safe spaces safe for everybody who is attending. It makes sure that we don't have an environment which is oppressive, and that means that we don't engage in activities such as sexual harassment, tone policing, using offensive language, misgendering other individuals. And as you are here, you are agreeing to that policy, and that means that we can enforce it as well. So, final thing for me to say is about Zoom chat. I've already said you can directly message myself, Kelsey, and Ash if you have any safeguarding concerns. If you have any concerns that the Safe Spaces policy has been violated, please direct message me. I have safeguarding in my name. I am responsible for enforcing that policy tonight. So please do direct message me with any concerns. And also do feel free to message us with any tech issues. We're not planning on having any, but you know, Zoom. So I'm going to get started with opening speeches. So candidates have got about 5 minutes, and I will probably be timing you all and cut you off. And candidates, you already know the order, but just a reminder, Shara, we will be starting with you. And then we'll be going over to Nick. So I'm going to hand over to you, Shara, for your opening speech. Over to you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Kelsey. Magnificently well organised, I can tell. Could you just remind me, are you going to give me a 1 minute warning or something similar?
I will let you know when you're at 5 minutes, and then we'll give you kind of an extra 15 just to wrap.
Okay, super. Thanks very much. So, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm really looking forward to the questions and to hear from you as well. My name is Shara Ali. I'm one of your candidates for Deputy Leader. I have enjoyed election in the past, 2014 to 2016. I was regularly described as the first BME deputy of a UK parliamentary party, which is something I hope I wore with sufficient pride and diligence. So what is it in the role of the deputy leader to do? Well, there's very much both an internal and an external dimension. The external dimension is one in which you would expect as one amongst equals on the leadership team, and also as one amongst equals on GPEX, to help direct the party strategically, and also to be punching above our weight on the media. But not just the media, also on platforms and conferences. And this is something that I have done on a regular basis, both as deputy leader, as a spokesperson for the party, and also in between. So, for example, I regularly appear in speaking in invitations across the country in university campuses, which I'm sure will be something of great interest to some of you who actually help run these events. I actually found a card here the other day. Just want to say thank you. This was from Oxford Young Greens. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Your insights are invaluable and will stay with us in the coming months. So I've always really enjoyed good relationships with the Young Green, and I hope this is something that can continue, not just in terms of speaking events, up against sometimes speakers who don't necessarily agree with us, but also on the media. And then internally, the internal dimension I think is really important. I mean, worth mentioning, of course, the absolutely phenomenal results in the local elections, and a record number of Young Greens elected this year, and I can see some of you in the audience. So obviously, team effort and a big pat on the back to you from me as well. That is something which I think in terms of internal mobilization is really important. And I know so many of our long-standing politicians do very much rely on the Young Greens, but that's a two-way street. So I don't want us to see that as something where we're just calling additional support during election campaigns when we need it. This is something where we need to be building up Young Greens for the future, because they are very much the future of the party. And finally, just to mention, why is this such an important aspect of Green Party dynamism in politics? Well, we are facing an existential climate emergency, and the youth of today are those, there's a double injustice here. The youth of today are those who are least responsible for the harmful negative impacts of climate change, but are most likely to suffer the negative consequences of it. And we have a whole set of policies on the bread and butter issues of the day, including, for example, supporting public services. I work in an educational system, and I see writ large the impact of unaffordable public transport on students, unaffordable accommodation on students, and an impoverished health system. In the environment I work in medical education, I see students coming out of graduation with £100,000 debt. And this is something that we must avoid. And Greens have fantastic policies in this area, not just in terms of doing away with student debt, making sure that everybody's entitled to a free education at the point at which they need it. And we also will put proper resourcing into mental health services. And this is one of the areas which I'm seeing students are very badly impacted by, especially during COVID and the pandemic. So I hope that in me, you can find a deputy who has a good, strong track record of working with the Young Greens and also working with the youth of today outside the party, helping to bring newcomers into the party and engaging on our policy areas and advertising them, whether it's on the public services of today, or also all those areas in which young people can have a greater stake, for example, in democracy and improving the living wage, and also making sure that they have a stake in society to be able to vote and to take ownership in the House of Commons, ultimately on a thoroughly disproportionate system. Thank you.
Thanks, Shara. Right on time as well. I'm very impressed. Oh, sorry, that was my timer literally going off. So we're going to go over to Nick next for your opening speech. Nick, 5 minutes, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name's Nick Humberstone and I'm standing to be your next deputy leader. I want us to be able to build a society that works for everyone. And the way we do that is by getting elected. That is our niche that we fulfill. You've got Greenpeace, you've got Friends of the Earth. They will do their role in fighting for climate and ecological justice. And you've got other organizations like Shelter that will fight for social justice, but they will do that through campaigning. Our niche that we fulfill as the Green Party is all about elections. It's about winning those elections and seeking to put policy through that delivers the society that can work for everyone through that method. And that's why I want to stand to be your next deputy leader. As an individual, I've gone through the process. I'm still a Young Green myself, and I've gone through the process of getting into politics, getting into activism, getting involved in the Green Party, and taking that to the extreme of running a campaign, standing as a candidate locally and mayorally. So I know exactly what that experience is like, and I understand every single aspect of our election strategy, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why that leads to us getting results. And that's important. That's what we really need from a deputy leader right now. So the role of deputy leader breaks down into 4 main areas. And I want to talk about each of those and why I think I'm the person to choose to represent you there. Firstly, you are a voting member of GPEX. There are GPEX elections going on. The deputy leader is also a role on GPEX. You have a vote. The same as the Young Greens co-chairs here do, the deputy leader will get a vote on issues, and those vary a lot. As someone that's worked on the Young Greens Democracy and Accountability Committee that holds the Young Greens executive to account and deals with constitutions and documents that a lot of people don't want to spend much time reading, I'm confident dealing with those documents and working out how we can deliver things within their limits. I'm also a union rep, so I'm comfortable having difficult conversations and working out how we can find a way through. And whenever I do that, we're always focusing on the resolution first, because the best thing we can do is get to the resolution as soon as possible. There's no point us having back and forth conversations, you know, each too worried to make strides forward, and then just delaying that resolution, which we know as soon as we get there, things will be better. There is also the job of supporting local election campaigns. As someone that has run and been a candidate and a campaign organizer for a local and mayoral election campaign, I understand the target to win strategy. I know there are ways that it could be improved, ways that we can try things a little bit differently within that framework to test it and explore that. And there are really great opportunities for how we can improve the efficiency by which we are trying to get people elected. We're hoping to obviously increase our number of members, which fortunately Labour's complete inaction on supporting strikes has been helping us do so. But having that extra capacity, if we're also more efficient with things, means we can win more seats in more places, and that gives us more opportunity to be able to put through green policies. I think it's really important, the local election campaign stuff, because that's what the job of deputy leader has a precedent set for it to be. You have to travel around the country, you go to local parties, you support them, you motivate them, and having a deep understanding of the work they're doing, the frustrations they're facing of having to put together data sheets or having to deal with difficult conversations with people on the door, or having to post through letterboxes that are at floor height. Knowing and understanding those really helps for you to be able to connect and deliver success and support them in their campaign, because you know exactly what it's like to be in their shoes. The two other parts of the role are representing the party, firstly in the media, but then also to the membership. Representing to the media, I am a confident speaker, and I've been working to develop this over time to improve that and get better, making sure that when I am improving, I'm not falling into the trap that many people do, where they start picking up more and more complex language and they assume that everyone would know that, or they dig themselves into a deep policy hole where all the experts are, and they forget that they have to get that message to connect to ordinary people who may have never heard of insulating their home before. I also want us to be really bold and loud about our policies. We have our policies, they deliver the society that we want to build, that we think will work for everyone. We shouldn't shy away from what those are and the vision for the world that we see. We should be clear that there are certain things that we think should be different and how they should be different and why we're fighting for them, because time and time again, we see that we get nervous about telling people that we love LTNs, that we think low traffic neighborhoods are a solution.
Wrap up, please, Nick.
Cool. Lastly, to say, it's also representing the party of the membership, and as a young activist who's got into politics from nowhere and then gone through with the Young Greens and through my local party and developed all of that, I understand that experience too. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, we are going to go to Zach next for a 5-minute opening speech. Over to you, Zach.
Thank you very much, Jane. And just to repeat, thank you to everyone for organising and for coming tonight. Hello, Young Greens. My name is Zach Polanski. I'm one of our elected Green London Assembly members, and I'm also the national spokesperson for democracy and citizen engagement. But tonight is about you, and I think the obvious place to start is that I love the Young Greens. It's as simple as that. You are our next generation of Young Green MPs, and I hope some of you are in this virtual room right now. And not only are you the next generation of Young Green MPs, you also are progressive, intersectional, good ideas and the source of that. And I think that's a really important point, because I think when you ask other people in the party, how do the Young Greens contribute to the party? One big thing they'll say is, well, they campaign for us. They come out and they knock on doors and they leaflet. And I'm not knocking that for a second, because there's many of you on this call and many other Young Greens who aren't here that I've done that with many a time. And in fact, kudos to Nick and Tyrone as well, my fellow candidates who just in the last elections both stood, and I was out with both of them at different times. And so when Nick talked about leaflet boxes, that's not a word, letter boxes that you put leaflets through, are at floor height. I think everyone who's ever done that felt that collective sorrow at having to bend up and down and do that. Now, that's a really important role that the Young Greens play, but it's not the only role at all. And we diminish your contribution if we think it's just about getting out there and campaigning. It's also about being a news source of good ideas and where they come from. And I often say in a slight kind of barb in interviews about the Labour Party, that if you want to see the Labour manifesto in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and look at the Green manifesto right now, because we're always ahead on ideas. But I think if you want to see where the Green Party is going to be, then go have a chat to the Young Greens or look at motions that you're passing at your conference, because ultimately those are often where our ideas are going to too. And I think that's a massive thing that needs to be nurtured, that needs to be respected. And also, as deputy leader, I guess the question always is, what will you do for the Young Greens? But actually, ultimately, the answer through all of tonight is going to be, well, to listen to you and see how you can best be served, and then to work with you, because that's a real Green value as opposed to kind of any top-down politics. This is about genuinely being with Young Greens and saying, actually, what do you need? What do you want? What would make you more efficient for the role that we're all trying to do, which is tackle the intersectional crises that we're facing, whether that's the climate crisis, Brexit, the pandemic, the state that our NHS is in, racism, homophobia, transphobia, the fact that disabled people are often left out of the conversations in society, all of those things, plus many more. Young Greens are often at the front of those conversations, and we need to be working there together. Now, to do that, I've talked a lot in this campaign about my ability to go on the media and the importance of any Green being on the media and being seen and heard on TV and radio. I think it's also important, because Nick alluded to it there, and I agree with him entirely, that it's not just about that. We also absolutely need to be embedded in our communities. And just yesterday, I was out on the picket line with the RMT. I go to protest frequently. I'm always out in communities. Before I was working in politics, I was a theatre activist, so I was doing community work. So everything about my politics, literally every single thing, has come from community and grassroots activism. Sure, since I've been elected, it's had a new form added to it too, which is holding the powerful to account. But I think that's fundamentally what I want to do with my life, is listen to communities, particularly vulnerable or oppressed communities, act as a conduit or a connection, and speak truth to power. And again, I think Nick is really right when he talks about speaking clearly, about keeping things simple. And Nick, credit to him, was talking about this at the last deputy leader election. I agree with him entirely then too. I think too often as a party, our comms can be too complex or confusing, because some of the things we want to communicate are nuanced. And I think something the Young Greens excel at is finding the nuance. So it's not kind of making it simple, but being really concise with it and really clear in what it is. And we saw that from Mick Lynch yesterday as well with the union strikes, when he says that essentially private companies are taking away £500 million and they can't even treat people with decent working conditions or a decent wage. I think people get that. Of course, there's more complex and nuance we need to go into, but I think it's always about working out what is the simple, most clear message that is going to empower people here and get people to vote for us. And I think that's what it is. So I just want to wrap up by saying, when I'm out doing this grassroots work and speaking clearly and concisely, almost all the time, whether it's Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, or within the Green Party itself, young people are always at the forefront of that. Students are often at the forefront of that. And I think, while never neglecting the contribution of other people in the party, and I know the Young Greens don't do that, but championing the Young Greens is absolutely vital. So to finish off, I'm so proud of you. I'd love to serve as your deputy leader, and I can't wait to work alongside you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach, for that. And then very finally, we're going to go to Ty for your 5-minute speech. So over to you, Ty.
Nice one. Thanks, Jane. And hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here tonight for these Hustings, and thanks to the Young Greens for hosting. I'm really looking forward to answering all your questions and speaking more about my platform. But first, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Tyrone, and I'm running to be your next deputy leader of the Green Party. And I guess before I speak more about my platform, I really want to speak about my appreciation and gratitude for the Young Greens and why I think this group is so important. As you might know, I was an active member of the Young Greens for many years, including serving on the executive committee for 18 months. And it's no exaggeration to say, if it wasn't from my experience with the Young Greens, I wouldn't be running for deputy leader of the party, and I wouldn't be speaking to you today. The Young Greens was my entry point into politics. When I joined the Green Party eight or so years ago, I don't really know much about how politics works, to be honest. I was just disillusioned with the other major parties. I felt nobody was standing up for me or my community or my people, and I wanted to do more. But when I joined, I didn't really know where to go. I went to my local party meetings a couple of times and a few events, but at times I didn't really feel like I was part of the group, or I didn't understand some of the political language, the internal structures of the party. I didn't feel up to speed. And that's not a comment on the local party itself or anything, but maybe a reflection on the accessibility issues within politics and how politics really cannot be often accessible for all. And with that, I stepped back for a year or two. I wasn't so much an active member, and I generally felt I did not know how to access politics. And that's even after the point I had joined the party. And then one day I got an email in my inbox, probably about 6 years ago, recruiting for the Young Greens 30 under 30 scheme. And I had that email open for weeks, deciding whether to sign up, knowing it was multiple residential weekends. And I was anxious that I wouldn't fit in with people that I perceived in my head would be better educated, better resourced, and better prepared to get into politics. And I convinced myself at this point that it wasn't for people like me. But I bit the bullet and I applied, and I was accepted a few weeks later, and I found myself on a residential weekend with 30 of the Young Greens, and I realised my fear was unwarranted. For the first time in my short Green journey thus far, I felt truly welcomed. I felt efforts were made to make sure the language was inclusive, the environment was accessible, and that was not intimidating. I was around at the Young Greens at different points in their journeys, some with more experience, some meeting other Young Greens for the first time too. But I had the best experience during that 30 under 30 year, learning invaluable knowledge on internal party structure, policy, election strategy, learning how to write and propose policy, how to run effective campaigns, and connecting me with Greens and Young Greens all over England and Wales. And when I graduated from that 30 under 30 scheme, I finally felt confident that I could make it in politics and I could make a difference for those who are struggling most. And that experience led me to getting involved so much more, to serving on the executive committee, as I've said, to give me the confidence and skills to stand as a Young Green candidate in the 2019 general election, and set me in motion for the multiple local election campaigns since, and standing up, sitting here, talking to you today. And this is one of the many reasons why the Young Greens is such an important and crucial part of the party. It is the entry point for so many future Green activists, politicians, and leaders. And the reason I spent so much of my opening statement speaking about this, maybe more than my platform, is because it highlights to me the urgent need to ensure politics, and especially our politics, is accessible for people from all backgrounds. While I feel somewhat lucky that circumstances led me to join in the 30 under 30 scheme and gave me a route into politics and the Green Party, it still hasn't been and still isn't easy. And if you want to understand why we are not getting more members from marginalised communities, and if those we do have feel they cannot run in internal or external elections, we have to make a genuine attempt to resolve this. As with everything I've said in my campaign, words alone are not enough. We need to take action to resolve this. We need to understand the barriers faced by those from communities we want to represent from getting involved more, and work to put in place ways to overcome them. We need to determine what support is needed to make politics more accessible, to make it easier to stand for elections, to make it easier to engage, and then we need to provide that support. I'm committed to making this party an accessible and inclusive party for people from marginalised communities and all communities. It's paramount we work to make the Green Party representative of the communities it wants to represent, and I'm committed to helping the party do this as deputy leader. If we want electoral success, we need to bring people with us. We need to establish trust in communities, we need to build power in communities, and we need to make change and secure justice for communities. I will use my experience as a community organiser to work with local parties to build local movements, to embed themselves in the community and build power from the ground up, inspiring new activists to get involved and inspiring new people to vote Green. I will spend my time as deputy leader on the ground with activists, making change and showing communities how our fight for climate justice is also their fight for economic justice, racial justice, and all forms of social justice. I will champion our liberation groups, work with them to make our party more inclusive and accessible. I will platform and champion the voice of youth and campaign against government policy which disproportionately affects young people. And I'll be proud to do this as deputy leader. So I'm really looking forward to the hustings today, and yeah, thanks. And yeah, looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ty. And we do love a good 30 under 30 shout out here, because we are Young Greens. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for those opening speeches. I'm going to hand over to Kelsey for the first question.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Hi, I'm Kelsey. Just really quickly. So these are questions that the candidates haven't seen. We're going to give each candidate 2 minutes to answer each question, and I'll prompt you when you're at your 2 minutes. And just to wrap up, before I ask the first one, a couple of things. One, we're going to pin the speaker who's answering the question. We've had a request from an access point of view. So just so you're aware that when you're answering a question, you'll be pinned. And before I ask the first question, just to give a heads up of the order, the first two will be Zach and then Ty. And the first question is, why are young people's voices so important within the Green Party, and what will you do to ensure that they are heard at all levels? Go to Zach first.
Thank you. Well, at risk of sounding contrarian, the first thing I'd say is everyone's voice is important in the Green Party and should be heard at all levels. But young people in particular, I think, have a unique perspective. And that's because essentially we care about environmental justice, but as Ty alluded to there, or said outright as well, there's no environmental justice without social, racial, and economic justice too. And that can't just be a slogan, that ultimately has to be embedded in everything we do. And essentially, when we look at environmental justice, the planet is essentially what we're guarding for the next generation to take over. So it only makes sense that the next generation and Young Greens have a significant say in what is happening both to our planet and to our society. I think another reason why we badly need to listen to Young Greens is that young people often aren't listened to in society. We've had this kind of 10 years now of Tory austerity and the gradual stripping of things, the university fees skyrocketing, etc. And young people have had a really, really bad deal of it. Now, I know that you can sometimes get people from the older generation going, well, it's nothing like that back in my day, but actually by every pretty measurable data set, it's quite clear that life has been tougher, both financially and socially as well, in terms of hate crime and the toxic kind of rhetoric that there often is in society and politics. So I think there's lots of really, really good reasons why young people need to be listened to. But I think the biggest thing as well is what I said at the outset, is about that unique contribution. And I think if you're missing a unique perspective on things, then actually you're lessening yourself as a party, you're lessening yourself as a society, and even individually. If you're not listening to every contribution that anyone can give you, then actually that is missing an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn and listen, an opportunity to have better policies. And again, it's those better policies that get more Greens elected, which is the ultimate goal. But of course, listening and empowering people is a goal in itself as well.
Thank you, right on time, well done. Next to Ty, and then just as a heads up after Ty, it'll be Shara. Ty, over to you.
Nice one. Thank you, Kelsey. And yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Young people's voices are so important within the party, outside the party, and within the movement as a whole. I mean, young people and Young Greens have shown that they are the most progressive and radical voice within our party, and it's so important that we continue to champion their voices. The Young Greens have shown time and time again that essentially they can hold the party to account, keep us to our values, and ensure that we are a party of intersectional politics. Yeah, I've seen, even within my time with the Young Greens working on and co-proposing policy, that this is where so many of the groundbreaking policies are formed, so many of the initial ideas are grown. I'm proud, even in my time in the Young Greens, when we co-proposed a policy, a groundbreaking policy on climate reparations, and then moved to work with the Greens of Colour and so many community groups to then co-propose the Green Party motion, which called for reparations and atonement for the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. And this is something that shows the power of the Young Greens, but also shows that we are the Young Greens, I can't say we anymore with my age of 30, really do understand that intersectionality between climate justice, racial justice, and economic justice. And I'll be honest, it was my time in the Young Greens that really awakened me to a lot of these concepts as well. The Young Greens is the radical, and dare I say it, left part of the party, loudest voice, and I'm proud of that. And it's important both within the party and outside the party. Young people have shown time and time again through the youth climate strikes, through the UK School Climate Network here and Fridays for Future, that they are the progressive voice that's going to move us forward to securing climate justice. That's when people have listened to as well. And that is who we need to. It's their future that we're talking about, our future, my future. And as has been said in previous opening statements, the young people are being disproportionately affected and will be disproportionately affected by policies now that they have nothing to do with. I'm a proponent of lowering the voting age to 16 because it's their future that we're speaking about again. We need to champion young people's voices so much and find a way to give them platforms, work with the young teams, protect the Young Greens, and ensure they have the budget and finances to move forward, continue to bring those voices up. Because without the Young Greens, sometimes I do worry. Oh, thank you. I do worry that we will not be held accountable to so many of our values. So yeah, the voice, so paramount to our party.
Thanks so much. Next to Shara, and then it will be to Nick afterwards.
Thanks, Kelsey. The youth of today are, as has already been mentioned internally, but also externally, they really are showing us the way. I've sometimes attended meetings with students in secondary school, for example, and they talk with such pride and aplomb of their strikes, climate strikes converging on Westminster, for example, and how incredibly insulting, isn't it, for politicians of the day, Theresa May at the time, to tell those students to go back to school. What I would have given to bottle that energy and reverse roles, to have those students who were in the grip of the existential climate emergency, really understanding how it's going to impact their futures and that of their families, what I would have given to have them in the House of Commons that day. So when I speak to students of many ages, what I see is certainly a kind of idealism, but let's not undersell what that idealism means. That idealism is ideals about value, and we are nothing if not a party of value. So it may be idealistic in some sense to expect or to want or even demand that everybody has the basic needs that they need to sustain a decent, minimally decent life, whether it's health, housing, or education. But it's also realistic to want that for everybody, and it can be done. And I think that's the kind of vitality which the youth of today bring to any political discussion. They bring not just their idealism, but a determination that we actually fix things as well.
Thank you, and apologies for the interruption. I'm not sure what it was. Over to Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, the problem we have is that young people are not represented in democracy in many different levels. Realistically, everyone's old, which is a problem, because if you want to build a society that works for everyone, you need to have everyone represented at the table. Obviously, it's not just being young. There are lots of other characteristics of people that are underrepresented, and having those people represented at the table for where we make discussions will make sure that the policies we're putting forward are working for everyone and not just for a few. As Zach also said, policies that we're deciding now are going to affect young people for longer than anyone else. Climate policies, if you are 70, you know, you'd like it to be at least 20 years because that covers you. You maybe like it to be a bit longer for your kids, but maybe you don't have kids. Maybe that is a reason that you don't care so much. But the policies that we decide today are going to affect young people for a significantly longer amount of time. So those are the quite obvious ones that we would have thought, you know, here's what our deputy leader candidates will say. So the one I want to pick out that's a little bit more different is that young people often don't have clouded judgment in terms of, if you have grown up in society and you've gone through experiences, when something new comes along, a new policy, something different, it's so easy to automatically just compare it to. Okay. I would take that as agreement. And yeah, they don't have that clouded judgment. So when you come along with a policy and you present it to them, or if they're trying to come up with a new policy, young people aren't saying, okay, how does this compare? Is it technically better than what we had before? Okay, that's good. They're saying, we're not going to compare it to what was before. We're going to say what is right and how should it be, and let's aim for that. And that's why it's so important that we have young voices there for that concept, and also for having representation where currently they are vastly underrepresented.
Thank you. Thanks all. And apologies for the interruptions. Yeah, we'll try and work out what's going on there. But yeah, thank you all for your answers. And I'm going to hand over to Jane for the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. It seems that someone's posted the Zoom link on Twitter. So just for the time being, I'm not going to let anybody else in the room because I don't think that they've actually signed up to attend the Hustings. I'm going to move on to the next question though, because it's a very important question. Nick, I'm going to be starting with you. So the question is, how will you assist the party in winning more young Green councillors and young Green MPs? And what have you done to this end up until now? So Nick, I'm going to go to you first.
So as a young Green myself, I was working on getting myself elected, which is a good place to start for us trying to get more young Greens elected. That was in Lewisham. I ran as our local party candidate, one of our three, where we were targeting a single ward in Lewisham. And then also I ran as our mayoral candidate, to which we had great success. We moved up. We unfortunately came 120 votes short of getting a councillor elected to Lewisham Council. I think myself was something like 131 votes short. But in the mayoral elections, we managed to move from 11% of the vote up to 16% of the vote, which is a pretty huge swing, to swing by 5% there. And also significantly, we switched places with the Tories there. So Labour have a solid control of the mayor there. And it was always Labour and then the Tories. And that meant when they were having their discussions, it's always, oh, we'll invite Labour and the Tories. But now we've shown that Green is the second preference there, which is huge. Hopefully that will stick after we've had the government decide to, make our electoral laws for mayoral elections worse. But hopefully that can stick for the future. So what can I bring to help others? Well, I can bring my own experience, my own knowledge and understanding of the process, my own conversations with other young Greens who have also been running these campaigns, who sometimes have had to break through into difficult local parties where they are resistant to new ideas. They're resistant to someone coming along and saying, look, we can do this, we can make a difference here. And that kind of enthusiasm is often brought along by new young members moving to an area and trying to make a difference there. Yeah, I think that covers the question. Thank you.
Fab, thanks, Nick. I was just about to ask you to wrap up. So I realized I didn't give you any warning. Apologies, Zach, we are coming to you next on this question, which I am happy to repeat if you can't remember it, and then we'll be going to Ty afterwards. But over to you.
I'm all good, thank you. And well done on dealing with the Zoom bombing to you both as well. That brought memories of the early parts of the pandemic. I thought that'd gone away. So in terms of what I've done to help young Greens get elected is the same as I've helped many Greens get elected, which is I've been everywhere I possibly can and been out knocking on doors with them. Also, again, many of you are on this call. I'm also hopefully there as much as possible, whether that's at the other end of the phone or sometimes on DM, just to give support. People who have become councillors, I've taken informal roles as mentor or giving advice, or in many ways taking advice as well. So I think that's a two-way relationship about the way that we work. When I was elected as a London Assembly member, one of the first things I did on the first day was ask about the London Youth Assembly, because that's something that I really want to see get more powers. And actually, along with Sean Berry and Caroline Russell, Sean's been working on this for quite a while. It now looks like the London Youth Assembly will have a question of their own at every mayor's questions. And I think that's amazing that the mayor can be held by scrutiny by the elected members, but also by the London Youth Assembly too. I've also done a fair bit of work with an organisation called Headliners, which are particularly for underprivileged youth and those in foster care. After mayor's question time, for instance, I've often hung out with them afterwards, done a workshop, chatted to them, and just spent time with them really talking about politics. And also I've done something called digital surgeries, which is where essentially you go into schools or universities and answer questions, particularly putting a focus on not just doing it for private schools, because they're often the people that ask, and public schools don't always think to ask, or sorry, state schools, and actually just making sure that you get around to underprivileged schools as well that might not necessarily ask. So in the bundle, really, it's be everywhere, do everything that I can, always support, always boost, and always amplify the voices of the young people.
Perfect timing again. I was just about to ask you to wrap up. Thank you very much, Zach. So Ty, we're going to come to you next, and then obviously we're going to go to Shara last. So Ty, over to you.
Cool, thanks again, Jane. And yeah, I mean, I obviously will start with myself, but only very briefly. But of course, as a young Green, I was a candidate as well. And, during that time was amongst sort of cohort of young Green candidates, all mutually supporting each other to try and ensure we had more young Green representation, young Greens getting elected. And even on my time on the executive committee, we worked really hard at that point to achieve or to help try and support what was at that point record-breaking young Green success. Although, in the local elections since, young Greens keep continuously re-breaking the record and having more success, which is just absolutely fantastic. And during my time on the committee of the Young Greens, I was working on all the comms and all the graphics to get people to the action days, support action days, get information and recruit people to those days so we can get more activists out there to support Young Greens getting elected. I also worked to set up a group of Young Greens of colour who were standing to offer mutual support between each other, as an understanding of the challenges and barriers and difficulties faced may well be different to those of the candidates as well. But I think it's so important that we do look to a party and winning getting more young Green councillors and young Green MPs. As I've just said so far, we've seen the young Green success, incredible success year on year. But it's not only about the success of getting elected. When young Greens get elected, they make a difference. They take action. We've seen that time and time again with numerous examples. So I do everything that I can to get young Greens elected, whether it's offering advice and support based on my experiences, going and joining in the Young Greens action days, promoting those action days, trying to use any platform I've got to get more people down there. I'll help young Green candidates reach out to community groups, reach out to their community and help them with the right messaging which will appeal to them and try and win over hearts and minds. I will use all my experience as somebody who has gone through as a young Green and gone through as somebody who's maybe had a bit of a difficult background in accessing politics to try and show people that they can as well. And I want to try and galvanize a new wave of youth activists to both join the party, get involved, and then run and get elected as representatives of the party. So yeah, again, in a nutshell, I would look to do everything that I can, but I'm truly committed and dedicated to getting more young Greens in a position where their voice is heard. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ty. You're all great with timing tonight. I'm very impressed. And then finally, over to you, Shara, on the same question about supporting young Greens to be councillors and MPs.
Thanks, Jane. You can rely on me to be really active and proactive as deputy leader. If you were to elect me and if I were to have the honour of doing so, I can give you a few examples. For example, during my deputy leadership, I went out up and down the country, often with Amelia Womack, not always with her, sometimes solo. I've actually got almost as many train tickets as she sometimes can show us. You know, it's really quite a feat, and it's really enjoyable as well. Abby Jackson, she was a young Green up in Hayward and Middleton, so I really enjoy that. In closer to home, also in London, I've helped out in Tower Hamlets, collecting signatures for non-target candidates, for example. You know, this is a very important business. It's not very visible, it's not very glamorous, but it's important. I think I used to hold the record in London for being able to collect signatures 10 down on the street, anonymous people, in 13 minutes. So yeah, it's something that I really enjoy. I love speaking to people on the doorstep. In other areas of campaigning, for example, one of the things that I think has been touched upon that I'd like to develop a little bit is the idea that we need to increase diversity across the party, and that does include the Young Greens. So I've been very instrumental in launching environmental leadership programs in an organisation called Uprising. And the great thing about that organisation is they not only focus on youth leadership, but youth leadership amongst the BAME community. And many of those individuals have expressed a greater interest in joining and supporting the Green Party. So that's a little bit about outreach. And finally, if I've got time, just to mention that I helped launch the Greens of Colour in 2015, and they put together a fund also to help develop candidates, particularly of that complexion, which is a fund which probably hasn't been best used. And as one amongst equals on GPEX, I hope to make it my business to see that that is put to good use.
Fantastic. Again, I was just about to ask you to wrap up. Great timing, everybody, on that question. And thank you very much for your answers. I'm going to hand back over to Kelsey for the next question.
Thanks so much. Let's see if we can get through a question without interruptions this time. So as a heads up, the first two respondents will be Ty and then Shara. The third question is, do you agree that transphobia within the Green Party is losing us members and support? How will you ensure that our existing trans-inclusive policies are consistently championed and that our internal structures ensure a truly safe and welcoming environment for trans and non-binary people? To Ty first. I know it's quite long, so if I need to repeat that at all, let me know.
Thanks, Kelsey, and really important question. I mean, I absolutely do agree that transphobia is losing its members because it's evident to see. I mean, it's not only losing its members, it's potentially going to lead to us being disaffiliated with our sister party up in Scotland. So there's huge ramifications right now for the problem that we have in our party, a problem that is seen outside of our party, and the problem that people talk about. And it's going to be a problem that's going to stand in our way of electoral success. You know, overwhelmingly, as I said in the LGBTIQA+ Hustings, the British public's fully support strengthening rights of the trans community. The government's own consultation has shown this. Yet, you know, within our party, some are looking to threaten those rights or take those rights away or ensure no new rights are given. And you know, it's not only deeply painful and damaging for those in the community and completely the antithesis of social justice, but it's not reflective of the will of the British public. And if we are seen as being right of the British public views, then who are we as a progressive party? And if people don't see us as the progressive party, and in my opinion, the progressive left-wing party, then what do they see us as? What is our identity? So the transphobia issue is a big issue, I do believe, because not only is it really deeply affecting the communities and affecting that community, but it's also losing and will lose our relevance. We are going to fall behind if we continue to get caught up in a discussion. Like I said, that firstly shouldn't as such be a discussion, but also the British public have overwhelmingly said in a government consultation that they are behind. So I think it's hugely detrimental to a party. I will continuously use my platform to champion, protect and defend trans rights. I've done that now with the limited platform I've got now. And as soon as any time my platform grows, any opportunity I will get, I will continue to advocate for those rights, not just advocate to keep the rights that we have, but also to strengthen those rights. And that's also a concern for me now, because we are looking to try and strengthen these rights. And it's not only the strengthening of those rights that's under threat, it's the current rights that we have that are under threat. So I will make sure, and I completely pledge to use my platform to defend those rights with as much as I can. But I'm sure that's 2 minutes, so thank you.
Just about to ask you to wrap up. Thank you. Next, you're doing very well on this one. Thank you everyone for being so timely. Next is to Shara, and then after Shara will be Nick. Shara.
Thanks for that question. I think it's be a good idea for us all to take a step back and just to reflect, I hope, on what damage this is doing to the party, conflict in general, whatever cause it might have, because there are lots of policy areas, for example, where conflict can happen. You know, HS2, I think there's a bit of a debate around that, maybe even nuclear power. So why is the question of trans rights so seemingly harmful and volatile to the party? Well, I think the Green Party of England and Wales did take a step back when they commissioned a report from Diversity Matters. And I've heard hardly any of the candidates speak about this. And I think we would be wise to look at that. And one of the recommendations, whilst acknowledging that there was a conflict around sex and gender in the party, was that we need to provide and foster forum for discussion. And I think that's where I come in. I am the candidate who is able to listen across the board and also to recommend positions and policy in line with party policy. One of the great problems where we're having in the party at the moment is I believe that we're guilty of sloganeering without actually looking at the detail. The devil is in the detail. And so when we talk about trans rights, is there or could there be a potential conflict or a perception, at least, amongst others in the community? And this would be going no further even than a judicial review into prisons, which acknowledged that there is a conflict of sorts. None of us, I take it, would want to advocate for somebody who has been convicted of sexual abuse to be put in with women and depriving their basic dignity and putting them at greater risk. So what we need to do, and I think I must be running up against the time, is to make sure that we foster healthy, legitimate debate.
Wrap up here, Shara.
Because whilst there are some people claiming that they find the environment hostile with respect to transphobia, and I would want to fight against that form of discrimination equally, there are also many women who are also leaving the party and have done.
I should stop there. Thank you. On to Nick, and then last will be Zach. Nick.
So in order to stand for deputy leader, you have to get some nominations. And when I went around and spoke to people that had nominated me previously when I ran, it hurt to see that a lot of those people that I had good friendships and relationships with, who now, when I go out to reach out to them and say, oh, hey, would you consider nominating me again? The response they get is, oh, I left the party a while ago because of transphobia. So up until that point, a lot of the stuff I'd heard, obviously you see on Twitter, people telling you that they're leaving, but it doesn't quite hit home the same way. And that moment where I saw people that I knew and got on well with no longer being members, it hurts that we have a party that's driving people out because of a problem that we can and should be taking action on. So in terms of the solutions for what I think we can do to take action and improve it, because it is definitely a problem that we have. It not only takes up a lot of people's energy, it's also completely unacceptable that we require trans people to put in so much more effort just to exist and integrate within our party and within society. So the two kind of solutions that I've been exploring at the moment which are still up for discussion, are that we need our leaders to show clear leadership. If you go to conference and Caroline Lucas stands up and speaks in favor of a motion, you can guarantee that the room will vote the way that she spoke on that motion. And the reason why is because we're looking at leadership. We see a leader doing a thing and we want to take inspiration from that. And we need that the same when we're dealing with transphobia in the party. Whether that is on Twitter, whether that's speaking at conference about motions in order to make sure that we're moving the progress towards making life easier and better for trans people rather than sending them the other way. Cool. So that's what we need from our leaders, and that's something I want to commit to. Another thing is we definitely need to look at the complaints process.
Sorry.
That's all good.
I'm going to stop there. Sorry. Thank you. Next, and finally up to Zach.
Thank you. I think what Nick said there was really powerful. And sometimes I think we've got so used to this issue in the party, we've not stopped back and reflected on how many brilliant members we've lost. And I'm talking about brilliant members because I'm talking about people who engage with the party and are active. But of course, even if someone was not active, it's still horrendous if someone feels like they have to leave the party because it's not a safe space. And I'm thinking about Tom Pashby, who ran against Nick last time, and they left the party. And of course, Tamsin, who ran as co-leader with the media. And Tamsin had so much to offer this party. They were a shining example of grassroots activism. And I think it is a blight on our party that someone like Tamsin felt like there just wasn't a space for them. So I think that's the first thing. We need to look at how can we create those safe, inclusive spaces where people feel safe as a basic requirement. We shouldn't be engaging for a party where people feel safe. We should be aiming for a party where people feel celebrated, loved, nurtured, respected. But safe needs to be the lowest of bars, and I think we have to get there. I think we can take heart that we can't take heart in the first bit, that when we look at the Tory leadership candidates, they all obsessed over sex and gender issues. But actually, when Channel 4 did a poll of Conservative members, they found that going after trans people was very, very low on their concerns. Surprisingly, they cared more about the planet, the cost of living. So I think we need to recognise for what this is, a phony culture war that is being driven often by the far right. That's where it started. And that's not to say that people aren't genuine sometimes in their concerns, but I think it's important to look at where the roots of it are. And I think when we talk about free speech and debate, we have to remember we're a political party. We have no obligation to absolute free speech. We're allowed to take positions and then represent those positions. And our position very clearly is a trans inclusive party that is intersectional, that stands up for vulnerable and oppressed people. And that's not limiting anyone's free speech. That's just saying what our party position is. And that's what a political party does that. Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks so much, sorry. Cool, thanks so much everyone for that question. We got through a whole question, we're interrupted, fantastic. I'm gonna hand back to Jane for the next one.
Thanks, Kelsey. We'll try and do the same thing with this question. So the Green Party obviously has lots of different policies because we are a political party, and all of ours are about kind of radical societal transformation, whether it's advocating for a universal basic income, electoral reform with proportional representation and votes at 16, or whether it's totally overhauling our education system, getting rid of academies and scrapping tuition fees. So candidates, what policies do you think we should be putting front and center of our manifesto? Kind of maybe not the traditional environmental and climate issues that we might do, but the ones that will really appeal to young people and students. And I realized I didn't say who was going to go first. And Shara, we're going to come to you first and then Nick second. And I'm just going to like preamble for like a minute because I realized that I didn't give you any warning and I'm really sorry. But Shara, I hope you're ready now with my little.
No, that's quite all right.
I'm going to hand over to you for your answer.
Thank you. So for me, the most important policy would be education. And people have had such a shocking time, actually, particularly post-Brexit, because remember what the European Union was going to offer us. And, you know, this is an institution which I know 90+% of us would have been campaigning to remain, and where I've actually worked and really found it very flourishing, and the idea to be able to live and work in or set up shop in one of 27 countries is just an absolutely phenomenal privilege and a right which has now been lost. And it's particularly felt in education and higher education in terms of the Erasmus scheme that's been lost, in terms of various funding programs, and the difficulty now, which should not be ignored or understated, of student exchange, the ability to go for just a few months or a term. So I think education is an area where there are a whole raft of policies where we can be advocating. I'm not saying we now need to advocate and push for going back into EU, although I'm sure that would be popular. I don't think that's realistic. I do think we need to draw a line under that for the foreseeable future. We can be pushing for other forms of exchange, international exchange, outside the EU institution, which can still be brokered. And moreover, as has already been mentioned, in terms of fees, having free tuition fees at university is absolutely fundamental. I mean, I can remember the days as well where it became even increasingly difficult for people to upskill. I'm a great believer in lifelong learning. For people to upskill, they were being deprived of the opportunity to go and study for a course if it wasn't higher than their previous qualification. Final sentence. I mean, this is a really retrograde way of thinking about education, to increase fees for people, whatever it is they wanted to study in a different disciplinary area. And I think that we could make, some real breakthroughs if we advocated more on education.
Thank you, Shara. So Nick, we're going to come to you next, and then we'll go to Ty and candidates. If you want me to repeat the question, please do let me know. I'm aware there was a bit of preamble to it. But Nick, over to you.
So for me, the main policy focus is around money. The reason why is I now have much more direct lived experience of an understanding of how difficult it is. I got a no-fault eviction. I got kicked out. I'm currently living at my mum's in Southend. That's how my life has dramatically changed around. And when I'm sitting down with my partner trying to work out where we're going to live next, or the possibility of buying a house in future, a very realistic thing that goes through my mind is it even worth planning for that? Should I just wait? Because things will definitely get worse if they keep going the way they are. And the better outcome is just to spend money and enjoy yourself for now, and wait until the housing market crashes, or wait until there's a revolution and things get better that way, because things look so tough and it's so difficult to work out what you should be doing next as a young person with a smaller income than other people, because you haven't progressed to that experience level yet, which we deem as being worth more money. So it's the policies around money that I think are most important, particularly things like universal basic income, which completely reshapes the way we look at money, the way we look at how our society is built, and the way we look around how work is distributed, including things like looking at volunteer work as real work. And then alongside that, things like rent controls as well. Rent is completely unaffordable in a lot of places, to the point where even if you find a way to take the advice of the internet and eat a little bit less avocado toast, or you cancel your Netflix subscription, the money you would save, it doesn't matter, because your rent's going to go up in the next year by that much anyway. So really, you're just stopping having avocado toast and letting your landlord get richer, which is not a good prospect for people to be able to feel stable and secure, which, if you're financially unstable and you're in a financially insecure situation, puts you at so much more risk of so many other things. So money is where it matters most. And a little shout out to Alexander Sallins, who has cheekily put rank £15 for minimum wage as a #1 policy, which I do agree with.
Thanks for that, Nick. So I think I said we were going to Ty next, and then that means we'll be coming to Zach last. So Ty, over to you.
Thank you. Really good question. Actually, it's been good because we've been asked a couple of times what a least favorite policy is, which might still be upcoming, but I just don't want to really trawl through and find policies that I completely disagree with. So this one's a little bit easier for me. And maybe choosing one is quite difficult because there's a lot of policies I'm passionate about, but there's two policies that I'm really passionate about. The first one is our Green Party drug policy. You may have heard me speak about this at previous hustings. It is such an important, groundbreaking policy. So much thought and effort went into this policy. It's scientific, it's peer reviewed. It's so many medical professionals, scientists, all sorts of people work on this to have the most forward-thinking, progressive drug policy that would literally save lives. I would implore everybody to have a look on our drug policy. It is very long because it is so thought out. One of the other things that really appeals to me about this policy is it is ready to be implemented. And what I really want from our policies, even though it takes a lot of work, is to be ready to be a party of government, because that's what we need to do and that's what we're showing. And we want people to read our policies and understand they could be enacted tomorrow. And that's what's so great about this policy. It's thought through and it's ready to go, and it will save tens of thousands of lives. It shows that drugs should be a public health issue. It's an evidence-based approach to drug use, drug taking, and what we perceive as misuse. It's so important. And like I say, the lives that could be saved. I'm concerned, I may be getting close to 2 minutes already, and I can't speak about another important policy, which was our commitment to refugee justice for African enslavement, or really our commitment to seek reparations for the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. As I've sort of said before, the Young Greens were really instrumental in the process of this groundbreaking policy, the first major political party to pass anything like this. And again, I don't think this is getting spoken about enough. And it's so important in our search for climate justice, especially for the colonial legacy of climate change and how it affects the global south, that we champion this policy. And some Greens have done some great work, such as Scott Ainsley getting Lambeth to pass motions to this effect, and Clare and Bristol as well. And we need to continue this. We need to be supporting local councillors to pass these motions in their councils. So councils put pressure on government.
Wrap up, please, Ty.
I'm out of time. I just love this policy and the drug policy. Read them both. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ty. And then Zach, over to you.
Thank you. Sometimes I prefer to go first because you just say the first thing that comes to your mind, that's your instinct. And as I'm listening to everyone, I'm like, yes, absolutely, the truth and reparations policy. Yes to our drug policy. Yes to universal basic income. But did someone say proportional representation? Now, the reason why I can't resist talking about this for a moment is because we can talk about all of our other policies, but ultimately, unless we have a fair democratic process in which we can get more Green MPs in a fair and sustainable way, then we can't get any of the other things done. Now, I won't go on about that because I talk about that a lot, and I imagine most people on this call have heard me say that, and they're on the right side of things on that, but I do need to say that. But while we're in democracy, I see Blossom's on the call, and Blossom's doing an amazing work with Caroline Lucas with an early day motion around making sure that council meetings are hybrid. It is simply not fair that they're not accessible as they are in Wales, and that's another democratic issue, in which case we can't get to the other things. Just very briefly with the rest of my time, universal basic income, yes, I agree entirely with Nick. A lot of these things are around the economy and the cost of living and how difficult it is for young people. And in London, I've been pushing hard with Sadiq Khan on a universal basic income, and he's now agreed that I might be able to try a pilot if I can prove it works. So I've currently commissioned a report that's coming out probably next month or a month later. It's going to reveal how we can lift over 100,000 Londoners out of poverty. And I'm hoping to show how we can do that in London so it can get rolled out across the rest of the country. But, I'm really hoping another city beats me to it first, so then we can make the case for it in London. So wherever it happens, it needs to happen soon. I also think culture and arts is something we've just not talked about in this election. And it's often forgotten about, but actually the way that we tell stories and who we tell stories about is absolutely embedded in our grassroots and in our activism. And I think it's really important that there's a big national conversation actually around how do we fund culture and arts, who are they for, and how do we get people involved in that. And then very finally, I went to Belgium 2 months ago to a European Green Conference and met Petra, who was a minister there, the first trans minister in Europe. And they just passed a policy called Right to Disconnect, which is saying if you're an employee and you work 9 to 5, your boss cannot make you check emails or phone calls after 5 o'clock. And I think that kind of work around the 4-day working week and a universal basic income, really shifting the direction between how we work, how we study, and how we play is super important.
Fab, thank you, Zach. And it's great to see everyone's enthusiasm for so many different policies. But I'm going to hand over to Kelsey for the next question.
Thanks so much. And I'm really glad we're asking this question today. I think contextually, the next question is very poignant, and I'm quite interested to see what people hear. So the question is, will you be supporting the Green Party trade union groups motion to conference for a £15 minimum wage? And more broadly, how will you ensure that the Green Party acts in solidarity with striking young workers this hot strike summer? I realised I forgot to say who was going first and second, so it's going to be Zach and then Ty, and I'm going to talk for a little bit and just give you a second to prepare. And I'm going to hand it to Zach.
Thank you. And I see you've got a thumb up from Alexander there. I co-proposed the policy, so I definitely support it. I don't want to be disingenuous. I took, not convincing, I would say, but we had conversations about it. And the only reason why we had conversations about it was I was worried about how do you cost it, how do you match it inflation, and how does this fit with our universal basic income? And the Progressive Economy Forum have done an amazing report that I'd encourage everyone to check out, which demonstrates quite clearly how we've had a lost decade, essentially, where wages have not increased, people have been absolutely squeezed. And I think Alexander's point always has been, and I do agree, it doesn't matter how we pay for it almost, it just needs to happen, because it's as simple as if you're someone who's working on a minimum wage or even less than the minimum wage, and you're paying your rent and you're paying your food, you might have a family to feed, that is just not how a society can function. So I always agreed it had to happen somehow. There was just a question, how do we make it work within our party so that it's coherent and matches our policy and processes? And I think we've absolutely got there now. So I'm more than happy to support it. And I've really encouraged everyone to support it. And let's see it pass and cheer it on. More widely is the question, how do we support trade unions? And I think it's a vital question, and it is beautiful been to see on Twitter today and on other social media to see so many people join the Green Party, because I think it's now fair to say without any spin, we are the only national party that supports the trade union movement and wants to nationalise railways. And I think it's important we get that out there. Now, we know Labour are speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying on one hand, oh, we've not sacked Sam Tarry because he went on the picket line. We sacked him because he didn't follow procedure or media kind of advice. And I just think that's not going to wash with the public. It's quite clear that Keir Starmer stood on a very clear platform of solidarity with trade unions and has trashed that all the way. Now, although I'm doing it now, I don't think it's good enough for us just to trash Labour or just to trash Tories. We've got to have our own positive vision. But I think the Green Party Trade Union Group have been doing brilliant work for a long time now in terms of doing that. And credit to Matthew Hull, who, while I've been an Assembly member and before, has often linked me with trade unions and with workers' struggles. And I've done exactly what I think any elected Green should do. I've gone to meet them, I've gone to listen to them, and then where they've been right, and they've always happened to be right, I've gone to join them on the picket line, I've challenged their bosses, and I've made sure I've made noise about it in the media. And I think ultimately that's what we need from a deputy leader. Someone who will roll up their sleeves, and it's not just about voting in chamber.
I'm gonna stop you there, Zach.
It's all right. Just keep.
Sorry. Thank you. On to Ty, and it'll be Shara after Ty. Ty.
Thanks, Kelsey. And yeah, you're right. It's a very timely question, which is good. But yes, absolutely, we'll be supporting the trade union group's motion for £15. I've sort of supported that already and sort of signed up on the Google Forms. And I think it's been quite clear that I've ran on a radical left-wing eco-socialist platform. And that means that we need to stand up and take action with workers demanding a better standard of living, take action with migrants and refugees against deportation, and really ensure that we are there and standing up for people. Because right now, as we've seen, has been said right now, the Labour Party aren't. If the Labour Party aren't the party of Labour, then essentially what are they? And they're not doing their job as opposition. So we need to provide that voice. We need to stand up for the workers, because right now that's how the Tory party are getting away with all these anti-trade union laws, and really going after civil society, the right for civil disobedience, and the right to demonstrate and to strike, you know, pushing through laws to allow agency workers to cover for strikers, completely negating the effect of strikes, or attempting to. I'm hoping it won't be as effective as they'd like, is completely damaging to society. So absolutely stand with motions that will look to empower workers and look to improve their rights. But it's not only about, you know, putting unequivocal support online and making sure that we do post on Twitter as Green Party that we stand with strikers, and absolutely we should, but we really need to be helping mobilise Green Party on picket lines and demos. It's absolutely great if members go and attend strikes, and it was actually great to see Zach at the RNT strikes the other day and giving a really impassioned speech. But what we need to do as a party is do more. We need to organise and mobilise other members to be able to get there as well, provide support for them to join the strikes, but also look to show that as a party, we are not just there giving words on Twitter. As a party and as a whole and as a collective, we are there on the streets, taking action with you. Because if the Greens are to be taken seriously right now, we must be seen at the forefront of protecting workers' rights. You know, we need to make a stand and show that we stand for the people where other parties are completely abandoning them. So I really want to commit to working closely with trade unions, working very closely with our trade union group. And really, thank you, reaffirming my commitment to workers' rights and more money. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ty. Next to Shara, and then it'll be to Nick afterwards. Shara.
Thanks, Kelsey. It is a terrific opportunity, as Zach has mentioned, to really showcase our commitment to workers' rights. The way in which Sam Terry was betrayed by the values of the Labour Party, that is a political space we should now occupy with even greater authority than we have before. I am a long-standing supporter and advocate of unions, union activity, whether you'll find me backing postal workers in Tower Hamlets, or firefighters in Brent, or cleaners on university campuses, who often have some of the worst terms and conditions, migrant workers who are being exploited, not given the opportunity to visit their families abroad. These are the kinds of workers that we need to be fighting for. I do sometimes think, I mean, it's often the Green Party quip is white, middle class, academic types. Well, the trouble is that we do have a bit of a problem with opening ourselves up to workers as a class, and I think that that's something that we should be able to overcome. I pride myself on having been to a comprehensive school, and unlike Liz Truss, who seemed to be apologetic about it, I think it's been a very formative experience. It's made me the kind of person I am, who I think I can slip into conversation with anybody and everybody. I don't see myself as the deputy leader who is out of touch with people at all. And finally, I do support the trade union motion going to conference, but I do think we need to be careful also that we don't just talk in terms of the standard economic system, which everybody here will understand needs radical overhaul. And that's why I'm also proposing a carbon budget system to conference.
Thanks so much. And finally to Nick.
Yeah, so firstly, I do support a £15 minimum wage, but I do understand also that there are other factors alongside that there are implications for, like for particularly small businesses, there is more of a burden on them, as opposed to when we've seen energy giants, taking £500 million of profit and none of that being shared with the workers that created all that profit. But I trust that our members, because of the policy process that we have, I trust that our members have solutions for that amongst our other economic policies. With regards to trade unions, it's a really exciting time because we're seeing, at least, I don't know if this is actually, whether it's just me or not, but it could be that trade unions have been doing all this all the time in the same capacity in the background all this time, and we haven't heard about it. But it feels like we've seen a lot more of it, or at least the media has picked up on it. And this is really important because when trade unions are demanding better, they're rising up, they're striking, and they're saying these situations and conditions aren't good enough and we need better. That sparks something which makes you start thinking about other things, about politics. What about your government? Is your government doing good enough? Do you think you can demand better there? So hopefully we'll see a lot of that union action, as much as it is part of the progression of politics, but we'll see some of that also convert directly into political action, which will help us put forward the policies that we have to build a society that works for everyone. So there's a gap there, and I'm really excited to see the opportunity we have to fill that gap, particularly with the possibility of maybe having some unions disaffiliate from Labour because they are rightly disgusted at the decisions of Labour and looking for a new home where they can be supported and championed every single day. That's what I have to say.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks everyone for answering that question. I'm going to hand back to Jane for the last question.
Yeah, fab. Thank you, Kelsey. So as Kelsey said, this is the last question. Ty, I'm going to come to you first, and then Nick afterwards. So this is a question that, while Kelsey and myself did not submit it, it is one that we feel quite personal about as two young disabled people leading the youth wing of the Green Party. So it's, how will you, as the deputy leader, support disabled Green and Young Green councillors and MPs and MSs when we get them, and make sure that their voices are heard? So Ty, over to you first.
Hi, bro. Thanks, Jane. A really important question. So I'm glad this is be put in before we close today, because I think it's really, really important. And I think, as I said, sort of throughout these Hustings and previous times we've spoken, I really do want to run on a platform that is championing accessibility and inclusivity within the party. And that's not just around accessibility for when I was speaking about myself and maybe political knowledge and so forth. So it's about accessibility and all the different barriers that cause people not to look to get involved in the party. And that means actually working actively to understand what those barriers are, to understand what challenges are in the way and what the party is doing right now that isn't making it inclusive. Because what sometimes we don't understand as those from outside of any particular communities is things such as microaggressions, you know, the small actions that take place that actually have quite a big effect for those that are affected. And you don't really understand those microaggressions often unless you go out and seek them. You know, I have it on a day-to-day basis always when there's little racial undertones or little microaggressions and stuff. And I know that's the case for many people with disabilities, neurodivergencies, and you know, and anything else that we may look to be speaking about today. So we need to work with people, speak to people, and actually listen to understand, and then implement policies and enact policies that are going to make a change internally, both to make it easier to sort of get involved and you know, get and to get elected, to run for elections, to feel confidence to run for elections, but also externally, you need to advocate in policies that ensure that disabled rights are championed outside. You know, right now we know that's not the case at all, whether it's through from housing to transport, to so many different issues, how difficult it is to even get an accessible home, never mind the difficulty in social housing that we speak about constantly, and I will always speak about constantly as a housing justice campaigner. It's even more difficult with people with any mobility or physical disability issues, and of course also for varying different neurodivergencies too. But accessible housing is so difficult to find. I'm going to see somebody next week in Hackney who right now is, you know, living up 50 steps, has a disability, large mobility issues, and essentially cannot access his home without a lot of pain. So leaves the house once every few days and cannot get any support from the local authorities, and just repeatedly told there are no accessible properties available. You know, and I'm going to see him next week to see if I can advocate on his behalf. Doesn't live in my ward or a ward we work in at all, but I understand the need to try and advocate the voice for what is perceived as a voiceless, because the voice has often been taken away. So I always want. Yeah, I felt like I've been talking for more than 2 minutes, but no one said anything. Yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Ty. It's my lack of looking at the timer, but it's fine. You didn't run over. So I'm going to go to Nick next, and then we'll come to Zach after Nick. So Nick, over to you.
So when it comes to liberation groups as a whole, something that I'd really hope to do as deputy leader is have constant conversations with those different groups, something booked in very regularly, because it's really important that when we're having one person representing the party, obviously we have Carla and Adrian as well, who are doing a great job, but when you have one person that's trying to represent the party in the diversity amongst the party, it's important that those conversations are had regularly to make sure that when you are speaking and supporting those groups, that you're doing it in a way that that makes sense and takes on board their perspective and experience. The other thing to say is that accessibility, when it comes to disability, accessibility affects everyone, and it's a benefit to everyone if we make things more accessible. I understand what the experience can be when the first time someone said to me, hey, you should put alt text on your image on Twitter, alternative text, which if you can't see the image, it displays the alternative text instead, which describes the image. And at first you think, wow, this is more work now. But it's important that we encourage people to quickly shift their way of thinking to say, it's not that it's more work now, it's that before you were letting people down and it wasn't good enough. So this is the bare minimum. And once you change that perspective on lots of different issues, then we can start to have a party that is accessible and that does champion everyone's right to be able to get involved within it.
Fab, thank you very much, Nick. So I'm going to Zach next, and then Shara afterwards. So Zach, over to you.
Thank you. I think it's a really important question. I think the first thing to say, and it's the most obvious, but is fundamental, that every space we're ever in needs to be accessible. And not just if we have a disabled person, but actually that should be the default, that social model of disability. And that also includes virtual spaces. But essentially no person who's disabled, especially if it's a hidden disability, for instance, should feel like they have to ask like they're asking for a favor. It should just be a default that the space is always accessible. That being said, we're not experts in every single disability. And in fact, someone who has a disability is not an expert in every single disability or even their own disability sometimes. So I think it's still about listening and making sure that there's a space that if people, for whatever reason, feel that it's not inclusive or they're not able to access the service or the conversation or the physical space or the virtual space, then we absolutely do the work that needs to be done to get there. That key motto, there's nothing about us without us. So we're always making sure that we're talking and engaging and co-designing with the people who are functionally involved. I think in terms of externally, I think our policies, by making it clear that we're a party that will speak up for disabled people, speak with disabled people, so not for them, but including them in the conversation. Shout out to Young Greens who have put the long COVID motion through to make long COVID seen as a disability and to look at the treatment. I think that's a really important conversation that's just not happening in society. Far too many people, even if it's just one person suffering, it's not acceptable. But actually this is affecting lots of people and the government just seem to not want to talk about it. And then finally, I think there's also mental health as well. I think it's about creating a space where we can disagree and we can disagree firmly, but actually there's still a level of respect where we can be kind to each other. And to do that, I think it comes back again to that conversation about knowing where our red lines are on policies. So people can disagree within a boundary and they can disagree respectfully, but people's identities aren't up for debate.
Fab, thank you so much, Zach. And then finally, Shara, over to you.
Thanks, Jane. One of our first hustings as candidates, it seems a while ago now, was disability hustings. And I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that I raised there. The first of which was, why don't we have a disability spokesperson? Well, funnily enough, in the last 2 weeks, we have inaugurated a disability spokesperson because we need to show our commitment visibly as well. So do follow Mags Lewis if you're not already doing so. A second initiative which I've spoken about is the 2 ticks scheme. Now, of course, we can't know everything that there is to know about the best initiatives professionally or administratively on the disability front, but there are some things which we probably should know which have been around for a while. So when we're recruiting, we should adopt absolute best practice to make sure that those who satisfy the criteria, the necessary, the essential criteria on a job recruitment will be guaranteed an interview. Because unless we actually see them in our midst, these candidates, they're going to be deprived of the opportunity which they deserve. And I've seen this work very well in other contexts, and it's a really important thing for us to be doing, to make our workforce in the party reflect better diversity in the communities. And finally, I think it's around funding. And whatever your priorities in the party around funding, I think we need to get much better about rotating monies and reprioritizing where necessary. So if we're contributing towards a scheme recurring for 6 years, which costs 15,000, doesn't matter what the scheme is, why isn't that money then going towards other campaigns as well? For example, we should be offering at cost to us, we should be offering materials where required in printed format. We should also be making sure that we have, and we're getting very good at that. Conferences team are constantly on the lookout. I'm going to ask you to wrap up. That we are final sentence, that we are offering proper signage and spontaneous signage in our conferences. And so it requires funding commitment.
Thank you all so much for your answers to that. And I'm going to hand back over to Kelsey.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So those are all the questions for this evening. So we're gonna wrap up here by giving each of the candidates 3 minutes to give a closing speech, and just a kind of reminder that this is a closing speech, your final pitch to obviously this room, but mostly Young Greens, young people and students in the Green Party as to why they should give you their vote for Deputy Leader. The order we're going to go in is Nick, Shara, Ty, then Zach. So to give Nick a couple of seconds to prepare, I'm going to do some preamble. But yeah, you've got 3 minutes and I'm going to hand to Nick.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone that's come along today. It's been great. And the variety of questions has been really interesting. And we've heard some questions that we haven't heard before, which is always good because a lot of these hustings end up being a little bit samey. So as I said at the start, I'm standing to be your next Deputy Leader. And I'd like you to vote for me because if you're a young person and a young Green, I have the most recent experience of what that's like. And that changes a lot. It changes a lot that the 10 years difference or 20 years difference, if you take the 20 years difference between you and your parents, it's completely different, the experience that you faced growing up and what it's like and understanding it. I've had conversations with my parents, other people have conversations with their parents, where their parents don't even understand the cost of rent nowadays, because we never talk about that stuff, because why would we? But it's so, things are so rapidly changing that it's really difficult for people to stay in touch with those issues, because you know, the price of money has changed so much. So in terms of standing for deputy leader, I said at the start, there are 4 main areas of which I think I am doing a good job and can deliver a good job as your next deputy leader. Voting on GPECs. I'm confident dealing with constitutions and all of the complicated documents that we end up going through and policy documents. And I also am a union rep for my organization. So I'm used to having those difficult conversations and working out how we can deliver success quickly and effectively without spending time being too cautious about how we get there. Supporting local election campaigns is an important part of the role. I can give 100% of my time. If I am elected deputy leader, I quit my job, this is what I do full time now, I will go around the country, I will sleep on floors, whatever it takes in order to support those campaigns in being successful and getting more Greens elected, because that is what the Green Party is here to do. We're here to get people elected and make change through enacting policies. And with my experience running and being a candidate for a local and mayoral election campaign, I know what it's like, and I can provide genuine support of that direct experience of what people are going through when they're struggling and when they're feeling hopeless in the face of elections that they're fighting. But we can win, and we've seen surprise wins. They can come through, so we have to give it everything we can at every opportunity. And in terms of representing to the party and to the membership, I care a lot about accessibility. A lot of that translates into accessibility of language, because we need to be able to connect not just with people that are political already. We need to be able to connect with people that are completely new to all this, have never thought about it. Maybe they're not part of a union yet, but they work for an organization that some of the workers are striking, and it's suddenly got them interested. We want to be able to reach out to them too. And my plain voice of a normal person can do that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next over to Shara. You've got 3 minutes, Shara.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm going to start by using my time to thank you for doing such a fantastic job of the organisation tonight. So thanks for that. Let me develop a few things that I've touched upon in some of the hustings so far. Firstly, and maybe haven't had full opportunity to develop. Firstly, there's the idea that I mentioned earlier about what vitality the youth of today bring, not just within the Green Party, but outside the Green Party, and how I'm tapped into those networks and how we need to bring them into the party to gain from their energy and dynamism. So there is the Uprising Environmental Leadership Programme, which doesn't just, using the idea of intersectionality, which Ty mentioned earlier, it doesn't just target youth leadership, it targets BME youth leadership. And this is something that we really need to get much better at. I'm sure you will agree with me on that. Also, there's the programs that the Green Party already has engendered, which have been very good in terms of 30 under 30s program, for example, which I've often spoken at and delivered training and listened and heard things that I can use myself at the same time. But let's just be a bit more ambitious even than 30 under 30s. And I think one of the things that, if I may, and this isn't supposed to be any kind of provocation at all, but I think I know many people in the party across the generations who don't necessarily, they don't classify as Young Greens by any means, but would love to feel better able to engage with you. And I hope that I could serve as a kind of a bridge to that, because I think we're losing out otherwise, because there is great wisdom both in young and in elder. And I think we've got to get to a place where there is cross-pollination between all generations within our party. And finally, we've seen examples amongst school strikers of a form of direct action. You know, this will be very new to them. And this is something which speaks to me as a founding signatory of Extinction Rebellion in 2018. And although I've seen some of their initiatives go a little bit pear-shaped, I think it's vitally important that we maintain our edge on the social and political transformation front, which, despite the horror show, which is the disproportionate electoral system to Commons, we need to be getting out there and building those communities and building that resistance, because that's where we're going to see transformation, because by God, we're going to need it with the amount of escalation in climate emergency that's coming around the corner. So please do give me your hearty consideration for Deputy Leader. Again, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for being so timely. Next on to Ty. Ty, you've got 3 minutes.
Well, thanks. Well, hi everyone. I've brilliant And thanks Jane and Kelsey for some great chairing or co-chairing, really in the spirit of being co-chairs as well there. Young Green members for great questions and candidates for what's been a respectful debate this evening. So thanks to all. And I guess my opening statement, I spoke a lot about my love for the Young Greens, and I could probably very easily spend another 2 or 3 minutes gushing. But maybe it's best to use this opportunity to give you some more reasons why I do think I'm the right choice to be the next deputy leader of the Green Party. You know, I've demonstrated I know how to build a movement locally, how to win social justice campaigns when failure seems the most likely option, and how I can inspire activists to get involved and join us for crucial campaigns. I think we need someone who will inspire people to join the party now, to rejoin the party who have left, who want to get involved in local activism and help us secure the better future we know is possible. I believe I'm the right person to galvanise this party, and I think this party needs a breath of fresh air that I can supply. I think this is our opportunity to show that we do believe we need to take action that speaks louder than words, that we do champion and support youth, and we do give a platform to those that many others don't, and that we want to do politics differently and appeal to new audiences. We need radical change now, and I want to help lead that change. I think the time is now to show people that the Green Party of England and Wales is an eco-socialist left-wing party that stands up for workers, for migrants and refugees, for marginalised communities and all of those left behind, that we believe in giving power back to the people and centering people and planet over profit. If you elect me as your next deputy leader, people will sit up and take notice. And we need people to take notice now. To steal a phrase from the Green Party manifesto, if not now, when? I think now is the time to elect a progressive, left-wing, young, action-oriented, community-led deputy leader. One who does not look and act like other politicians and will show people we are ready for radical change. I do not only want to be the next deputy leader of the Green Party, I am experienced enough and ready to be the next deputy leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. I have extensive campaigns experience. I've worked as a community organiser. I've won many successful campaigns. I've been involved in successful local election campaigns. And I advise charities all over England and Wales on movement building, influencing, communications and community engagement. I've got experience engaging and championing youth, as I've said, serving on the executive committee and representing the Federation of Young European Greens at COP26. I've written articles on the climate crisis, racial justice, youth activism and housing, and I've got extensive experience appearing on the media and panel debates. I'll use this experience to help lead the party to success. I'll spend time working with local parties. I'll champion all of our liberation groups and work to get more diverse candidates elected both internally and externally. And I'll be proud to do this as your next deputy leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. So thanks again for these hustings and hope you all have a really nice evening. Thanks.
Thanks, Ty, and thanks again for being so timely. And finally, on to Zach. Zach, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Kelsey, and just want to endorse all the thank yous to you and Jane and to all the Young Greens for this marvellous hustings tonight. I hope it's come across how proud I am of the Young Greens and how I can't wait, if I'm deputy leader, to get out there campaigning with you. And I think it's worth saying that of my campaign team for this deputy leader campaign, a lot of them are Young Greens. And I think that's a reason for that, is because they know that I will listen and I will engage and I will collaborate. So this is a good chance to shout them out and also say thank you for everything they've been doing over the last month or two. People will know my platform by now, I'm sure, which is essentially we have so many crises in society right now. We need to have more Greens on media and TV and radio speaking clearly and authentically so we can get the Green MPs we need. That's what this is about, is getting more people elected. And I do think having an elected person in a relatively senior role does send the message to the media that the Green Party are serious, that we have grown up as a party and that we take this deputy leader role serious in a way maybe we haven't before. And that's no slight on Amelia. Amelia Womack's done incredible work of being deputy leader when we were a tiny party and growing with it. And it's only the fact that she's grown the party while she's deputy leader that there's now a space for someone who is elected to come in and take that deputy leader role. I know it concerns some people that I would be double hatting, but I think it's fair to say, as a London Assembly member, over half the London Assembly members are already councillors. Sean Berry, of course, was co-leader, mayoral candidate, councillor and Assembly member all at the same time and absolutely bossed it. So it's been demonstrated that it absolutely can be done. I'm also Jewish and gay. Now, that doesn't mean I understand every diverse perspective, but it does mean I come from a diverse background and have a unique perspective. And I think to end this hustings to speak to the Young Greens, this is about you, because being young gives you a unique perspective. I want to listen to that. I want to amplify it, and I want to work with it so we can get on the media, myself and other Young Greens and other elected Greens and non-elected Greens, so we can speak powerfully about the change society needs. And when we do that, and when people hear Greens, they want more Green MPs. That's how we win. That's how we grow the party. And that's how we get Carla elected for starters in Bristol West. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks again for being timely. That's everyone. Thank you all so much for those closing speeches, and thank you all so much for answering all of our questions this evening. That's the end of our hustings, and I want to just echo what's been said, I think, by all the candidates, but also from me and Jane. A massive thank you to all four of you for coming along, for answering our questions, and for being here this evening. We really appreciate it, and thanks for everyone who's attended to come and watch. I have a couple of last notes to end on. So after